Duchess Elisabeth in Bavaria, affectionately called Sisi, was born on Christmas Eve 1837 in the Herzog Max Palais in Munich. Her mother, Princess Ludwika Wilhelmine, was the daughter of King Maximilian Joseph, the first king of Bavaria. While her mother tried to maintain a sense of order in the household, these efforts were often undone by Sisi's father. Duke Max Joseph was a wild personality who, despite his noble status, enjoyed a lifestyle beyond the bounds of aristocratic expectation. Sisi adored her father, whose unconventional lifestyle shaped a childhood that defied the limitations of a young noble girl. Despite their mismatched marriage, Princess Ludwika and Duke Max Joseph had 8 children survive infancy, so Sisi grew up surrounded by many playmates. Growing up at the lakeside Possenhofen Castle, Sisi was immersed in the freedom of the wilderness. She spent her childhood largely outdoors, running barefoot through the gardens, climbing trees, swimming in lakes, and, her favorite lifelong hobby, riding horses. Because of this early life of freedom, her education was not very structured, and she often skipped lessons to go riding under the open skies, which in Sisi's memory were always blue. Sisi's first meeting with her future husband, Franz Josef I, was not actually meant to be a meeting between the two at all. Sisi's mother, Princess Ludwika, was the sister of Archduchess Sophie of Austria, who just so happened to be the mother of Franz Josef, Emperor of Austria. Archduchess Sophie had engineered her son's rise to the throne, convincing her husband, who was next in line, to step aside in favor of their son. It's important to note that Archduchess Sophie gave up the title of Empress for this, a decision that likely fueled her dominating behavior towards Sisi later on. As her son grew older, Archduchess Sophie decided he was in need of a wife who would serve as Empress of Austria. Where better to look than among cousins? So, she wrote to her sister, Princess Ludwika, as a marriage, between cousins, was a common practice in the Habsburg family line to consolidate power along dynastic ties. She intended for this to be a quiet, submissive girl, someone that would fit the role suitably without challenging her authority. Princess Ludwika declared her eldest daughter, Helen, to be a perfect fit, and the plan was soon in place. The well-educated, devout young girl began her preparation under her mother's guidance, with the expectation she would soon be empress. In 1853, Princess Ludwika accompanied Helen to the imperial villa in Bad Ischl, where they were to meet Franz Josef and his mother. Who else should join them but Sisi herself, who was brought to support her sister during this understandably stressful time. When the 3 ladies arrived, hopes were high for Helen to win Franz Josef's heart. All 3 women were clad in black mourning clothes in honor of a recently deceased aunt. It is said that black was very becoming to Sisi, livening the richness of her dark blonde hair and enhancing her complexion. It was, unfortunately, not so fitting for Helen. Archduchess Sophie later wrote, "Next to her completely artless, childlike sister, Helen seemed all at once very austere. The black dress was not flattering to her, and perhaps really did determine the course of her life, as some people later claimed." Once they met, Franz Josef fell in love at first sight, just not with Helen. He was captivated by the then 15-year-old Sisi. A ball was thrown on the eve of Franz Josef's birthday, and it was there the emperor presented Sisi with an engagement bouquet of flowers, leaving her sister sidelined and humiliated. The new imperial couple was married 8 months later in Vienna, crowning Sisi Empress of Austria. Sisi's own feelings during this time are contested. According to Archduchess Sophie, Sisi allegedly said, "I love the emperor very much, if only he were not the emperor." But it remains uncertain whether she actually made this statement. It's thought she likely admired Franz Josef's sincerity, but did not fully reciprocate the passionate love he felt for her. I can't imagine how overwhelmed the 15-year-old Sisi must have been, and what she felt for her sister Helen. And yet, whatever she felt, Sisi had little choice in the matter. As her mother put it, one does not send the Emperor of Austria packing. From the very start, Sisi was ensnared in a lifelong contract she could neither refuse nor escape, her freedom sacrificed before she could even understand its loss. Sisi described her empress life as being trapped in a gilded cage. She felt profound homesickness, and in a distant land with no one to confide in, she expressed her sorrows through poetry. But what is springtime bliss to me, here in a faraway strange land? I long for the sun of home, I long for the banks of the Isar. Sisi spiraled into a deep depression. These conflicts were only exacerbated by her controlling mother-in-law, Archduchess Sophie, who was used to making all the decisions. From the start, the independent-minded Sisi and the authoritative Sophie clashed. The older lady was likely offended by Sisi's clear distaste for the constricting life as empress, something she herself had sacrificed. Franz Josef, for one, had never resisted his mother's authority. Just a few weeks after the wedding, Sisi was pregnant. Despite this, she remained alone. The young girl found a measure of solace in her deep love for animals, especially her parrots. Her mother-in-law, however, quickly put an end to this pastime, telling her son that if Sisi looked at one of her parrots for too long, her child would come out looking like one. As Sisi was expecting, Archduchess Sophie forced the shy girl to repeatedly appear in public, declaring it Sisi's duty to show off her stomach, the hope of a future heir, to the nation. To the court's great disappointment, Sisi gave birth to a girl in 1855. She was just 17 years old. Shortly after the birth, Archduchess Sophie snatched the infant from Sisi's care, insisting on raising the child herself and even naming her Sophie. Just a year later, Sisi gave birth to a second daughter, Gisela, who was also immediately snatched by her grandmother. This was again a girl, which meant Sisi had failed to give birth to an heir to the throne, which further diminished her power in the court. After a while under this oppression, a silent rebellion began to stir within Sisi. She became less submissive, less quiet, and more aware of her formidable position as empress. Her greatest point of contention with her mother-in-law was the right to see her children. They now openly argued. This time, however, Sisi won Franz Josef's allegiance. The first, and only time, the son opposed his mother. He wrote a letter to Archduchess Sophie. "If you would be gracious enough to think about the matter calmly, you will perhaps understand our feelings of pain at seeing our children enclosed in your apartments with an almost joint anteroom, while poor Sisi, who is often so heavy, must pant her way up the stairs, only rarely to find the children alone." This was the first time Sisi's wishes were not just acknowledged, but openly supported by her husband. Revolution was brewing in the Austrian-ruled Hungary. The imperial court went to Hungary in 1857 to find a land seething with unrest. But for Sisi, the Hungarian court represented a stark contrast to that of Austria. Hungarian nobles were outspoken, confident, and passionate. Sisi immediately developed a fondness for the country and its people. She struck up a lifelong relationship with Count Gyula Andrássy, a Hungarian nobleman who had been exiled just years before for his part in the Hungarian Revolution of 1848 against Austrian rule. It was during their Hungarian visit, however, that Sisi's daughters fell ill. Gisela recovered, but the 2-year-old Sophie succumbed to the illness. The 19-year-old Sisi was devastated. She is said to have withdrawn herself, refused food, and cried for days. Archduchess Sophie used this as an opportunity to prove her daughter-in-law as unfit to raise imperial children. After all, it was Sisi who had taken the children against her mother-in-law's wishes. As a result, Sisi gave up the fight to be with her daughter Gisela, who was henceforth exclusively raised by her grandmother. Months later, the still distraught Sisi once again showed signs of pregnancy. On August 21st, 1858, Sisi gave birth to her first son, Rudolf, Crown Prince of Austria and heir to the throne. Unsurprisingly, Rudolf was taken under the care of his grandmother. The birth was advantageous for Sisi, though. It solidified her as the mother of the future Emperor of Austria, finally giving her some power. The Empress began a more fierce defiance of the Viennese court. She traveled by herself, living at one time on the island of Madeira and another the island of Corfu. She went back to Possenhofen as well, the first time in 5 years. This traveling allowed her to experience a taste of the quiet life away from Vienna. Subsequent to these travels, Sisi began an intensive study of the Hungarian language. She hired a private tutor and appointed one Hungarian girl in particular, Ida Ferenczi, her lady-in-waiting, despite Ferenczi's low origins. Ferenczi would become Sisi's closest confidant for the next 34 years of her life. During their increasing interactions, Count Andrássy was also rumored, although it was never confirmed, to be Sisi's lover, which scandalized the court. It may come as no surprise that also at this time, Sisi and Franz Josef's marriage began to suffer. By 1867, war appeared inevitable between Austria and Hungary. Sisi stood in the middle of this tension. She embraced this role, however, skillfully serving as an intermediary between Austria and Hungary and softening both sides to an eventual compromise. The Compromise of 1867 established a dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary, which granted Hungary significant internal autonomy while remaining under the rule of Franz Josef, who was crowned their king. This meant Sisi was crowned Queen of Hungary. Count Andrassy was appointed Prime Minister. A grand coronation ceremony was held, during which all eyes were on the beautiful Empress, who wore a breathtakingly intricate gown inspired by traditional Hungarian costume. In 1868, Sisi's fourth child, Marie Valerie of Austria, was born in Hungary. Marie Valerie was widely considered Sisi's favorite child, who was showered with affection by her mother, a mother who was finally able to keep a child from her grandmother's grasp. As for Archduchess Sophie, she died in 1872 of pneumonia. In her lifetime, she had sacrificed much for her son. Let's not forget she literally gave up the title of Empress for him. To Sophie, her behavior towards her daughter-in-law wasn't acts of malice, but rather acts of duty. Yet, her entire life, the unchallenged authority and obsession with maintaining the strength of the empire created a cage in which Sisi did not fit. It is said, however, that both Sisi and Archduchess Sophie managed to create peace once and for all in the elder lady's dying moments. Among many things, Sisi's often remembered for her beauty. She was widely considered one of the most beautiful women of her time. Yet, there's an element of tragedy to her life in the limelight. With each new eye upon her, Sisi became more and more conscious of her looks, and of preserving them. This led to a plethora of unhealthy habits. One was her extremely restrictive diet. She would go some days only consuming eggs, broth, or milk. To preserve her physique, she also regularly engaged in intensive exercise, which was particularly groundbreaking for a woman of the time to do, let alone an empress. She would do gymnastics, go horse riding, and sometimes take walks that could last up to 10 hours. At one point, the 5'8" Sisi slimmed her waist to only 16 inches. Her extremely long, vibrant hair was also a big source of pride for Sisi, which at one point reached all the way down to her ankles. Every few weeks, she would dedicate an entire day to washing her hair with raw eggs and cognac. She grew particularly paranoid of hair loss and would instruct her servants to collect the fallen hairs during styling for her to inspect. What's more, she had an extensive skincare routine, bathing in olive oil and sleeping with a face mask of raw veal in an effort to preserve her youthful appearance. She also had a collection of photos of beautiful women, which she asked her companions and Austrian diplomats to send her from across the world, including Paris, St. Petersburg, London, and Constantinople. Some have interpreted this as a way for her to measure herself against other women, but others have thought it was an expression of Sisi's own appreciation for beauty. After 32, Sisi refused to pose for photographs, wishing to solidify her youth and beauty throughout history. She deeply feared the effects of aging. Many have attributed this behavior to the stringent norms of imperial life. Sisi had had everything taken from her children, her youth, her freedom. Her appearance, however, was the one thing she could control, to an extent. Perhaps that's why the thought of aging haunted her so much. Inevitably, even her youthful beauty was to be stripped away from her. In her final years, Sisi was met with great tragedy. In 1889, Sisi's son Rudolf committed suicide along with his lover, Baroness Mary Witzera, at the Imperial Hunting Lodge of Mayalin. This double suicide deeply affected Sisi. To deepen her grief, in a span of just 2 years, she lost not only her son, but her father, her sister Helene, her mother, and her closest friend, Count Andrassy. Sisi is said to have dressed in black for the rest of her life. As a result of this grief and Sisi's increasing depression, she became more and more distant from the Vienna court and her husband. She pursued endless travels, wandering across the globe. Franz Josef was grieved by her distance, and although he attempted to lure her back, she refused. Towards the end of her life, the couple's relationship evolved into more of a deep friendship. In 1889, the 60-year-old Sisi was in Geneva, Switzerland on one of her travels. It was also at this time that the anarchist Luigi Lucchini was in the city. determined to kill an aristocrat in the name of anarchy. On the 10th of December 1898, Sisi and her lady-in-waiting left their hotel to catch a steamboat. Despite concerns expressed for Sisi's safety, she insisted on walking without an entourage. As the two women passed Luceni, he pretended to stumble, knocking down Sisi, whose head was cushioned against the concrete by her thick, pinned-up hair. The Empress made her way back up, seemingly unharmed, and continued onwards, thanking those who helped her. As soon as they boarded the ship, however, Sisi collapsed. Her panicked lady-in-waiting unbuttoned her tight bodice so as to help her breathe, only to find a small splotch of blood above her heart. Sisi had been stabbed with a makeshift file. She never woke up again. After being told of his wife's death, Franz Josef allegedly said, "You have no idea how much I loved this woman." This tragic empress had ruled for almost 50 years. She was a shy young girl torn from her life of freedom and thrust into one of the most powerful positions in Europe. Yet in reality, it was a position with very little control. And while she defied convention, she nevertheless fled from her problems into a life of solitude. Was she a revolutionary figure who defied imperial expectations, or a tragic escapist who ran from her responsibilities? Although her story has been largely idealized since her birth, I can't help but feel a sense of sympathy for Sisi. It makes me wonder what she would have thought of the world today.